when I hired on in 1975, it had been the NGS for about 5 years. It was 1970 when they changed from the U.S. Coast and Geodetic Survey to actually the National Ocean Survey, which took over that, and then it was broken down into parts, and we were the National Geodetic Survey under the National Ocean Survey, which now is the National Ocean Service. When I hired on in 1975, and before that, was broken down into field parties. We called them field parties. I'm not sure why they were called parties, because it wasn't a party. But anyhow, it was made up of field parties, and within the field party, it was broken down into two parts. We had night workers and builders, basically. The night workers, of course, would make the observations. The builders would erect and tear down the Bilby towers as needed. A Bilby still tower is an adaptation of a windmill tower, a four-legged windmill tower. It was adapted to 3 legs, and that was the genius of Jasper Bilby. He took this design. Well, it was Aero Motors who he worked with, the company Aero Motors, who built windmill towers, and he said, well, why can't we take this 4-legged design and make a 3-legged tripod out of it? And so that's exactly what they did. They took it and made it 3-legged, and then made a tower inside of a tower. The reason for that was to have 2 independent towers, because if you just had one tower and you're up there walking around with the instrument, the movement of your body walking around on the tower would disturb the instrument. You wouldn't be able to get anything done. So it was 2 completely independent towers that we built, one inside the other. The one inside supported the instrument, and the one outside had a platform, a cage we called it, where you could put your equipment down and walk around on the platform boards. Above that was a superstructure that actually had what we called a light plate at the top of it, mounted at the top, and it was plumbed directly over the Mark II, and that's where we would show the light from. If there was another tower we were showing the light to, we would show the light from the top part of the tower. And that was another 10 feet above where the instrument rested. The Bilby tower was designed so that it could be completely dismantled and loaded into the back of a truck, piece by piece. And that's how we built it, piece by piece. The first thing we did when we got out was we laid out a tripod and the anchors in the pattern where we would put the anchor holes in. And the first thing we would do was jump down and we would start digging the anchor hole. And we did that. We didn't have a backhoe at the time. There was another party, I think it was G19, had a backhoe, and we envied them, but we dug all of our holes by hand, and that was some hard digging. We would dig the hole, and it would, for a typical 77-foot tower, say, the hole would have to go down about 3.5 feet. And that was big enough to have 2 legs, both the inner and outer tower, down in the hole, and completely separated too in the hole. Once we got the hole to the right depth, we would start setting the base. We would attach a leg to the anchor and set it down in the hole. Then we would take the parts we had laid around the building foreman while we were digging the hole, and the people on the building crew. We had 3 legmen, a takeoff man, and a building foreman. That was our typical building crew, 5 people. And that's the number of people that was assigned to build that tower in that day. So while the 3 legmen were digging the holes, the takeoff man and the building foreman would be laying out the steel. And for the base, when we set the base, we would always pass that steel up by hand, hand over hand. And then when we got to a certain height, usually about 3 sections, maybe 4 sometimes, 3 sections or 4 sections of tower, and each section of a tower was about 13 feet. Every time we would build or get to the top of the 3rd or 4th section, we would come down, and then we were able to set the base. We were actually, at that point, able to line the two towers up with each other, and then fill the holes, backfill the holes with the dirt. And it was always just dirt. We never used anything solid. There was always that separation between the two towers. The typical tower was a 90-foot tower. That, when it came from the factory, it was a 90-foot tower. And so we had to carry all of the steel around with us because we didn't know how tall we were going to need. We did have an idea when we looked at the reconnaissance was done months in advance, so we had an idea of what we would need, and if we didn't have what we needed, we could get it from another party. Strangely enough, the flatter the land, the taller the towers. When we were working in West Virginia, it wasn't unusual to have a 50, 64, 77. It was rare to have a 90 in West Virginia. But as we went down to Louisiana, that's when we got into the big steel, 90, 103, 116-foot towers. And these are, of course, where the instruments set at those heights. And on occasion, the reconnaissance guy kind of missed the mark, and he called for a certain tower, and we built it, and when we got up there, it was too short. So we had these things called supers, and a super section was a 10-foot extension, and you would basically take off the top part of the tower, and you would insert this 10-foot super section, and then you would build the top part of the tower back on top of the super section. And there were occasions where we needed more than 10 feet. We ended up putting two super sections on a tower. A 116-foot tower with two super sections gets you up to 136 feet, right? And the strange part about it is when you're climbing that tower, you're used to climbing the tower. It's tapered as you go up. Well, as soon as you hit that super section, it's straight up, and it feels like you're leaning backwards when you're climbing. It's a weird feeling.
My father had joined the Coast Survey in 1953, I think, and then I was born in 58. And we lived there about 5 days or so is what I've heard, and we started moving. Every family had a trailer. Ours, a park model. It wasn't a camper. And ours was 8 by 45 feet long. And my dad, the government would furnish a truck. They were painted bright orange, and they said Department of Commerce, United States Coast and Geodetic Survey on it. And every man that was on the party was given a truck, and we pulled the trailer with. My mother followed along in the car. Most of the time we were referred to as gypsies. That's what they compared us to. And a lot of places we moved to back then did not have trailer parks. So they would build us something on a fairgrounds. They would build a trailer park, or just, different places. And there were places that people were afraid of us when we'd move in, because all these people lived in their hometown all their life and hadn't left, and here these people were coming in these trailers, and they didn't know what we were doing. So sometimes they were a little afraid and would maybe want to try to run us out because they called us gypsies, but we were good gypsies. I remember it was all normal to me. Nothing was strange because I grew up knowing what my dad did. I wasn't alive when my dad built towers like Charlie did, but he started out building towers. And then he became a recorder on the night party, and then he was an observer. He did the observations, and he was the 1-0. He was the head observer. And there were 36 families at one time when I was little, and that meant there were even more men because there were single men. A lot of the builders were single when they would first come on. And so there were probably 40 to 50 men on our party at one time. And so there was stuff going on all the time. But my dad, when I was growing up, was just an observer working at night.
We had night workers because the best time to make observations was at night. You had less interference from the refraction, and it was just much easier to see the lights in a clear vision. We had to observe towers from one tower to another tower, and they were anywhere from 2 to 10 miles apart, and so it worked much better when it was dark and you could see the lights from a distance. When an observing party went out, there were a number of towers around that tower they were observing from. And each one of those towers had to have a light keeper go out there and post a light. They would climb the tower and just take a little 2-inch light and maneuver it around until it was pointed directly at the observer. And then every tower that surrounded the observer would have those lights. And we might have, I guess, a normal number of lights that they were shooting at night was about 6. But I do remember times when we had 10 or more. When we would do our work on the towers, we would do either angles, we would either measure angles, or we would measure distances. Nowadays, of course, we have total station instruments that do both. But back then, we could only do one or the other. Measuring distances was a job in itself. We had very primitive, at the time, equipment. And the instruments that we had, the person had to be trained in order to operate it because they were so complicated, so complex. And we would have to, on the mirror tending end, we would have to have our mirror set up, and we would have our responsibility as a mirror tender was to have the what we call a mirror bar, which was a bar that was 8 decimeters long. 8 decimeters long, and we had a hole in the middle, a hole on one end, and a hole on the other. So we had to point that mirror bar, we had to plumb it over the mark and point that mirror bar at the observing party. And then we would take instruction from the observer who was running the instrument, and we would provide weather information, temperature and pressure, and then we would also move the mirror when he told us to. Back then we had to use the 3 different positions in order to resolve the distance with the equipment that we had. It was kind of a check on itself. We would measure 3 different distances, and then those distances we knew were exactly 4 decimeters apart. But our job was to provide the weather, the pressure and temperature when they called it, and of course they were keeping temperature and pressure on their end, and then they would reduce the distance using atmospheric corrections. It was kind of interesting to me back then that we were assigned a truck, we were given a schedule, and we were on our own. We had to be out there when we were light keepers or tending mirror for electronic distance measuring. We were on our own. We had to be at a certain place at a certain time and be ready for the observer when they called for us.
Something else that was interesting when I was little, I guess teenager, so the men, my father and the men on the party always talked about the black box coming and that they were going to lose their job. And it always scared me. And for years and years, they kept talking about the black box is coming and it's going to take our job. We won't have any jobs. I didn't know what they were talking about. And then that black box came, GPS, which was a yellow box, and it did pretty much take our job.
Yes, it was a white box first, but then it quickly changed to yellow. Yeah.